Okay, so I'm going to guide you through several of the important concepts from deconstruction theory that you'll need to know for the upcoming exam and to complete your vocabulary exercise. So, starting from the simple and then working to the complex. What is a signifier? Well, Tyson says that it's either a sound, image, or gesture. For our purposes, let's just focus on sound and image. By sound, she simply means the sound of the human voice. Like, for instance, my voice right now speaking to you. A whole host of signifiers are just streaming out of my mouth right now. And we know that these words, if we speak English, have very, very definite meanings that are coming out of my mouth, right? So just simply refers to the human voice's articulation of a word, okay? For image, uh, for instance, you can see my mouse is pointing to the image of the letter E, also G-A-M-I, or spelled I-M-A-G-E. We know, if we're speaking English, that these particular letters, which are signifiers in themselves, when they're arranged in this particular way and spell the word image, that itself, the words that we read on a page, right? That is a signifier. Okay, not terribly difficult to understand. What is a signified? So the concept to which the signifier refers is a signified. Okay, so plenty of words coming out of my mouth right now, signifiers, just boom, 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 boom. Uh, and they all refer to a particular concept that we come to associate with particular signifiers as we enter into the symbolic order, if you will, when we acquire language. Uh, so, next, what is a sign? Well, a word is a linguistic sign. And it's simply the combination of a signifier plus a, a signified. Okay. I may ask you to just briefly write down what a sign actually is on the exam. I may ask you a couple short answer questions. What is a signifier? What is a signified? What is a sign? Signifier plus signified. Okay, simple enough. Things are about to get a little bit more complicated. So, deconstruction, just like structuralism, as Tyson says, conceives of language as a non referential system of signification in meaning. Why? Well, just to paraphrase Tyson, because language does not refer to things in the world, nor simply to our concepts of things, but to the play of signifiers of which language itself consists. Okay, so structuralism thinks of language as non-referential or a non-referential system of signification in meaning, because language does not refer to actual things, phenomenon, beings in the world, but to our socially constructed and ideologically inflected concepts of things. So, for example, uh, when I refer to myself or think of myself as a white male human being, those are three concepts that have a very, very immense and intricate history, right? That is tethered to this story that men in power, white men in particular, have told about what it is or means to be white, of European descent, to be male, to be a human being, right? Uh, and the story that white men have historically told themselves has remained relatively stable for a good period of time. Structuralism, just so you know, uh, is a conservative theory of language and also a conservative theory of subjectivity. It assumes, like deconstruction, that language is the bedrock of our subjectivity, that language fundamentally structures our subjectivity. The way we think, the way we believe, the way we desire, the way that we behave, the way that we conceive of reality, the reality of ourselves, others, etc., etc. But it assumes that language is basically conservative and it basically stable, right? That it signifies in very determinate, definite ways. And it's difficult to get language to change its its meanings. Okay? Deconstruction is significantly different. Okay? Uh, Now, as I've mentioned in previous screencast video lectures, and also as I mentioned in class, Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction theory, he looks back at the history of language, all different types of language, but mainly languages in Europe and languages, over the past couple thousand years, dating back to Aristotle. He sees that language is relatively stable; its meanings are stable. What is that language? Individual words signify is relatively stable, uh, but he also theorizes and posits that that language is predominantly shaped by the politics of power. Who has the power to be able to define, to name things, to tell stories, right? Was to say create fictions about the nature of reality. Uh, who has the power to shape language, right? That tells us something about the nature of language and how and why it is that language signifies in the particular ways that it does, right? Derrida sees that when the political dynamics of particular societies change, indeed they can change under very, very definite circumstances, very, very rapidly, the meanings of particular words can indeed change, right? But that's all dependent upon who has the ability to give voice to the meanings of language, right? And there are particular circumstances, the meaning of words like male versus female, the meanings of the word human, the meanings of the word nature, and so on and so forth, can undergo rapid change, uh, which suggests that language, yes, it can go undergo periods of long, 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 long stability, right? But that it's susceptible to being influenced by politics, right? And when political dynamics change and other voices are raised in opposition to the dominant meanings of particular words or language itself, then the meanings of race, gender, and so many other things can be in a state of play so that language can change, and indeed change human beings and society for the better. What is discourse? So, a discourse is a social language, according to Tyson, created by particular cultural conditions at a particular time and place. And it expresses a particular way of understanding human experience, or as I put it here, reality. Okay. So, if you recall from one of the screencast video lectures on feminism, I referred to the statements on the so called differences between men and women articulated by various famous men in positions of power over the past couple thousand years in the history of the West, or in the history of Western civilization. Those statements reflect a discourse or a way of thinking on gender that really didn't change for a good 2,000 years until fairly recently, when the political dynamics of Western societies started to change so that women asserted that the meanings of the word female or feminine uh, needed to change, right? In their experience, the meanings of the word female and feminine didn't jibe with their experience, and they had the courage and also the circumstances were conducive to women banding together in solidarity and saying, okay, this whole discourse, this story on gender, about the so called essential differences between men and women needs to change, right? Because it doesn't reflect the truth of their experience. So, for example, remember that Derrida, when he looks back at the history of various languages, is looking at philosophical, legal texts, literary texts, written in different times and places, right? Predominantly by men. He sees that language or this system of signification and meaning is relatively stable. A certain type of story is told, right? And that story is structured by a set of binary oppositions that he sees recurring again and again and again. And only recently has this discourse structured by these binary oppositions changed for the better of society and humankind in general. But for a good 2,000 years, there was an assumption or a set of assumptions based on a discourse on gender that men were fundamentally different than women. That if you were male, that you were in possession of this thing granted to you by either God or nature, right? Uh, that allowed you to be able to transcend or overcome or at least discipline, domesticate, civilize the so called lower half of human nature that was associated with the condition of being female, right? So that if you were a man in the time of Aristotle, you thought of yourself or conceived of yourself as more human than women on account of the fact that you had this thing called reason that allowed you to be able to transcend the impulses of the body, the emotions, the passions, appetite, what have you, that gave you the agency to be able to create culture, to transcend your natural animal condition and create this glorious thing called civilization, right? So this discourse on gender has over the past 100 years or so undergone significant revisions, but is still with us today, right? So deconstruction is an interesting theory. It's a theory of language, it's a theory of subjectivity, and it is a theory of politics and how it is that language and culture can indeed change for the better. Okay, so that'll do it for our uh, lecture, a screencast video lecture on deconstruction.